EV companies are reporting exciting sales numbers and projections in the first half of 2022. How do you think of this sales boom?
What we're seeing here is, the implementation of policies on a global basis around different countries is starting to really shape the manufacturing strategies of the OEMs themselves. So it was notable even in the height of the pandemic, when the automotive industry was kind of suffering, that there was no kind of change in the policies and regulations around emissions. So if you look at kind of, the EU or Northern Europe or China, etc., then the policies around reducing emissions were maintained and in fact, were accelerated. And so this is why we've started to see across many countries, we've started to see the implementation of deadlines, whether it be 2030, 2035, 2040. Everybody's now starting to talk around the fact that by that particular time frame, no longer will we be allowed to sell internal combustion engine based platforms. So that in itself is obviously guiding the philosophy of the manufacturing strategies for the major OEMs. And even in those places where perhaps they're not necessarily banning the internal combustion engine, the actual policies themselves are such that there is no other option. So if I take the EU as an example, by 2035, they want to have zero emissions from the tailpipe. Now, obviously, the electric vehicle is not the only option. There are other capabilities that you could bring into play, such as hydrogen fuel cells, or maybe, alternative fuels that could reduce the emissions at the tailpipe. But certainly, the electric vehicle at this point is the most mature of the technologies. And so this is why we're starting to see, again, the manufacturing strategies of the OEMs shift towards that. China is an excellent example where, they've built in policies which, on the one hand, continue to support the traditional internal combustion engines. So, for example, the dual credit policy, it talks about kind of the fuel consumption, but it gives you extra credits if you're building new energy vehicles. And so that kind of that is really shaping the philosophy of the OEMs which are in operation in China, because to be actually successful on a year-on-year basis and to be able to make sure that they can continue to sell vehicles, then the proportion of electric vehicles that they are building has to increase. And so this is going to be reflected not only in terms of the domestic OEMs which are in China, but also the international OEMs operating in China as well. And the other thing we see with countries such as China, as well as countries such as Norway, who have kind of, if you like, to a certain extent led that EV revolution, is we see the implementation of sort of, if you like, soft incentives to the consumer. So yes, you can kind of offer the consumer, a certain discount on the vehicle or a tax credit, but on top of that, you get a soft incentive, such as the ability to be able to drive into a city if you have an electric car, the ability to be able to drive into a bus lane if you have an electric car, or free parking, or being able to apply for a license plate. So all of those soft benefits naturally pull the consumer towards the electric vehicles, and so that is also helping to shape the if you like, the manufacturing output at the OEMs.
For the sake of environment and to reduce costs, do you think it's more viable for EV makers to reserve some space in advance so drivers can always embed new cells or modules without replacing the car?
That's certainly an option. I mean, what we are starting to see with the vehicles and the new architectures I'm starting to mention is that it's very much software defined. So, this is why we're starting to see that in some respects, you could buy a vehicle today with maybe say a base level of options, but then 2 or 3 years down the line, you could say, well, actually, I would like that particular feature, and you could actually pay for that feature. And so that in that respect, then you're not necessarily going to be always looking, 3 or 4 5 years down the line to say, well, I want to buy a new vehicle because the new vehicle has this particular feature set. Actually, you can go, if you're happy with your car, then you can just subscribe to that new feature and pay the OEM for that. And so that kind of software defined vehicle is starting to kind of shape the manufacturing philosophy of the OEMs as well. But again, as you said, the other side of that is, being able to replace the battery after 5 to 10 years of use, and make sure that we have a full kind of circular economy where you can replace that battery and make that either break that battery down so that it can feed into new battery cell manufacturing or be used in some second life application, and then at the same time you kind of provide the consumer with a new battery replacement for the existing battery that was on that vehicle. So certainly that is something that could potentially be an option as well moving forwards.